Hello everyone, welcome and welcome back to my channel. My name is Rafaela. I'm an educational sociologist based in Tokyo. And in this channel, I talk about my academic life post-PhD. I work as an assistant professor, so I talk about my academic life, my life outside of academia. So if you like this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel. And in today's video, I'll be talking about my study routine. When we talk about studies, I believe that there are different types of study, and I see a lot of people making mistakes of treating all kinds of studies the same way and trying to address them in the same way. And I learned that the hard way that it doesn't really work like that, especially for us adults, that we have different responsibilities. Especially if you're academics, we have to teach, we have to research, we have to travel for work, all those things. It's really difficult to address the studies the same way that we used to when we were younger. So basically what I do is I divide my studies into three different types. The first one is the study prep, the second one is light study, and the third one is deep study. So let's first talk about the study prep. This involves you preparing your material. This involves you organizing your materials and also organizing your space, let's say, for you to create more room for study, and also taking some notes of the things that you have done so far. And if you have read any paper, maybe you can just take notes. I like to use Notion for this kind of task because it's easier for me to search for the content, and also I can keep track of all the papers that I've read in different categories, and I like the visuals a lot better than using Excel. The second type of study is light study, and this involves you doing some light kind of reading, meaning it doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to your study. It could be something a little bit far but somehow connected to your study, but that you're interested, that you want to expand your knowledge. And it could be something like watching the news or listening to a podcast or watching a Netflix series on some kind of documentaries. I study about education, so I really like to watch some videos about education in different countries, and also read some news of different kind of policies that these countries have been implementing. So this is the kind of light study. And last but not least, we have the deep study. This is studying like concepts, studying classic theories in a field. Like in my case, I study educational sociology, so I have to look both into education theories and also sociology theories. So those are the types of study. And when I divide these three types of studies, it's easier for me to time block within my calendar, so that, let's say, if I'm commuting to work, I will be doing light study because I cannot actually be using my PC. So I have my iPad with the materials that I want to read. I use Kindle Unlimited, so I can browse some books that I find interesting related to my studies or the class that I'm teaching. And I also like to download some papers that I find interesting that I can just read briefly, and if I see that this is very important for my study, and then I will reread it during a deep study session. Now, when it comes to the deep study, I like to do it in front of my PC so that I can actually take notes, write, and brainstorm all those things. So I have a specific time, like a longer time period in my calendar, so that I can address this kind of study in a more dense way. Sometimes if you have very short time for this kind of deep study, you will feel rushed and you won't really be able to study fully the way you really expected. So I like to do deep study either in the morning or in the early afternoon, so that if I still have to do some kind of admin work at the end of the day, I can address that before I leave work. All right, so now I will be sharing with you some concepts that I apply to all these three kinds of studies so that I can make each session as productive as possible. So the first one is to have your purpose clear of what you want to study at the time. Let's say if you're commuting, you know that you will spend a certain amount of time to commute. So you will say, okay, I want to read this one paper while I am commuting, or I will read 10 pages of this book. If you're doing like a deep kind of study, it's a little bit difficult to have a clear purpose because sometimes you don't really know what's the purpose until you actually start studying. but that's okay. You can maybe set a time, like say 3 hours or 2 hours, and I will try to write this paragraph which is related to this study. Or you can say, I want to create one PowerPoint slide from a presentation related to this study. So when you have this purpose, it's easier for you to keep focused because you know that that's what you need to do. And if you do not finish that, it will affect your future work. So it's really helpful to have a clear purpose. Another thing that I try my best is to create this environment that is less stressful. We all know that, especially when we have to do this deep study, that we don't really know what we're going to encounter. We tend to feel a lot more stressed out because you want to study, you want to find this specific concept that you want to apply, or you're trying to apply that to your study, and sometimes you feel anxious that you're not really seeing much of a progress. So those are the moments that I try to romanticize the study process as much as possible to make it feel a little less stressful. For example, I like to go to my favorite cafe to study so I can view the sceneries and I can enjoy the movement of people. That really helps me feel a little more fresh. Because if I'm too focused, sometimes it's really difficult to see what's right in front of you. So I like to create this environment that I can reset my mind every once in a while. And also I have different kinds of playlists for the task. If I'm working on some I don't know, Excel sheets that I need to create, that it doesn't really require that much of my attention, then I would just play some deep house music or some like electronic music. But if I'm doing heavy study, like deep study, I would not play anything because I feel like every time I listen to a lyric, it will kind of distract me. So instead, if I'm working from a cafe, for example, I would just play white noise or brown noise. It would just shut out these tiny noises that kind of makes you distracted. And another thing that I really like to do at the end of each session is to keep track of what I did that day, meaning I journal, I take notes of whatever I did, and then I also plan the next day's study, because sometimes what I see people do a lot is feel stuck before they start because they don't even know what they have studied already and what they need to study. So what I like to do is every time I finish reading, I just pick up another reading for the following day and I just insert it in my calendar so that when I wake up in the next morning, I already know what I'm supposed to read, or even leave it open so that I don't have to, bother myself trying to find that file that I was trying to read. On that line, I really recommend having all the materials that you need to study very handy, because sometimes if you close the books and you keep your files in a very difficult place for you to find, you will end up not really read or studying. So what I like to do is to have these files very accessible in my iCloud. And if I'm studying using the book, I would just leave it in the table. I will not close it. That way, every time I pass through the table, I know that I have to study that. Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit more about focus. I see that a lot of people struggle to focus independent of what kind of task that you're working on. I would suggest that if there's anything that's bothering you, try to solve it before you study. Meaning, if there's an email that you need to reply, if there's a little task that you needed to submit, just do it, because if you don't do it, you will keep thinking about that task all the time when you're studying. And if there's anything bothering you about your private life, for example, I don't know, if you have a fight with your parents, I don't know, you can just write it down, like journal, and just try to take that off your shoulder so that when you're studying, you can focus fully into that. Also, try different methods, try different timings for you to study, see when your focus is best working for you. Sometimes I see a lot of people trying to work as if we were working in corporate, and we have a different lifestyle, we have a different work process. I know it's not a typical study kind of video because we're academics, we cannot just simply study the method as if we were studying for exams. So I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!